She disappeared while walking to school. After she realized she had forgotten something at home, she turned back and took a shortcut through the woods, where she was confronted by a man who before shooting her 2 times. When police arrived at the scene, they found her dead in her bedroom. She was lying face down on the bed. She had been stabbed to death. For more than a decade after her there was no person of interest, little evidence, and a murder victim with no justice. He was shot dead in the chest on the night of August 24, 2018. He was immediately taken to a nearby hospital where he was pronounced deceased. Some cases take decades to come to their resolution and go cold when the investigative techniques are exhausted because of lack of technological and forensic advancements. But as time goes on and the forensic technologies progress, these cases often come to their resolution to provide closure to ones involved. Today in this video, we are going to look at 3 of such cold cases which came to their resolution years after the crime was committed. These will make you wonder, what would have happened if there had been no advancement in technology? And despite committing such horrific and scandalous crimes, would these criminals have been free all their lives? And what do the authorities do when they are left with the prime suspect who isn't alive anymore to be prosecuted? So without further ado, let's get into these 3 cold cases solved in 2022.
From North Dakota, there is a ginormous tornado coming.
This is the story of an 18-year-old Anita Knutson, a student at Minot State University who was killed nearly 15 years ago. She was found stabbed to her apartment on June 4, 2007. Years later, after the case went cold, it was found out that her roommate was involved in the murder.
If somebody was being picked on, she would stand behind him. When she was in high school, there was a girl the principal sent her home because
Anita Knutson was living away from home, but she was close to their tightly knit family. She was known to be a person who would make anyone who talked to her comfortable and like the most important person in the world.
Anita was the coolest girl, like everybody at school loved her. I was really lucky to have her.
On June 4, 2007, after not hearing from Anita, Gordon Knutson, her father, grew worried about his oldest daughter. He went to her apartment. Anita's car was parked outside and the apartment was locked. The apartment manager let him in the apartment where he discovered something which he would never have wished in his entire life to see. Knutson's father had called the police. In the yard outside her apartment, Anita's father showed police a sliced window screen that led to her bedroom window.
I seen somebody laying in there. And I walked over and the window was open and I touched her head. And I said, "You get that door open."
When police arrived at the scene, they found Knutson stabbed to death in her bedroom, covered with a large house coat. She had been Nothing appeared to have been taken from the apartment except for the removed window screen from the teen's bedroom and the murder weapon. A bloody had been left behind in the sink. A few years later, Anita's death was followed by another tragedy in the Knutson family. This time, it was their brother Daniel. What haunts me most about the death of my sister is that whoever killed also took the life of my brother that very day, Anna Knutson, Anita's sister, said. She said that after Anita was killed, their brother was never the same. He died by suicide in 2013.
We were driving home and my brother was crying. I was like, "Daniel, what's wrong?" I've never really seen my brother cry or even be like the slightest bit sad. And he's like, "Anita's..."
The case captured national attention, and billboards featuring Knutson had been posted around the area for years in an effort to assist in finding her killer. But the killer would not be found until 15 years from the death of Anita Knutson. For more than a decade after Anita's murder, there was no person of interest announced. There was little evidence and a murder victim with no justice. But 4 years later, a break was made.
Close were you to Anita? She was my best friend back in high school in the beginning years of college. We went to high school together, went to our senior prom together.
Were you dating?
No, not dating. I just had a crush on her. We were just friends.
The police tried to actively investigate Anita's case for the past few years, and finally, with the help of a show called Cold Justice, they were able to move forward and regain focus on the case. Due to resources, logistics, planning, and experts, the show was able to provide and police were able to obtain an arrest warrant. The Minot Police Department said that Nicole Rice, 34 years old, was in custody in relation to Anita's murder. Rice was at work on Minot Air Force Base as a civilian when she was arrested. At a press conference, police said they weren't able to share details of the break that led to Rice's arrest, but would release more information at a later date. Rice, who was Knutson's roommate at the time of her death, is charged with murder, which is a Class A felony and is being held at the Ward County Jail. There was never enough to arrest her, but I would say she was always a person of interest in the case, said Police Chief John Klug. Rice made her initial appearance by video at the Ward County Courthouse. The judge set Rice's bond at $120,000 or a $250,000 surety bond. On April 21, 2022, Rice will be back in court for her preliminary hearing and arraignment. The authorities claim that the turning point in this case was really just trying to pull all the information together and put it in an order that made sense. As they said, a lot of information was information that they had. It just took a little bit of refocusing and a lot of paying attention to the fine details. My heart goes out to the family. I wish we could have solved this sooner, but at the same time, I'm glad to say that we have the person responsible for the murder of Anita Knutson in custody, said Chief John Klug while finally closing the case.
My heart goes out to the family. I wish we could have solved this sooner, but at the same time, I'm glad to say that we have a person responsible for the murder of Anita Knutson in custody.
In 2018, the Austin Police Department said that officers were called out to the 1600 block of Mearns Meadow Boulevard for reports of shots fired just before 10:30 p.m. on August 24th. When the police arrived, they found 23-year-old Jonathan Rogers on the sidewalk with obvious trauma. He was immediately transported to Del Seton University Medical Center, where he died from a gunshot wound to his chest. Following an investigation by the Austin Police Department, an arrest warrant was issued on December 8, 2021. A U.S. Marshal-led task force arrested 25-year-old DeAndre Eric Connor on a capital murder charge and linked to the case. After being contacted by the APD for assistance in Connor's arrest, members of the task force developed information that he was still in the Austin area. Connor was observed at an apartment complex off Runberg Lane, where he was surrounded and arrested without incident. Connor was taken to the Travis County Jail, where he'll await judicial proceedings. Unfortunately, this was all the information that I could find on the internet about the case of Jonathan Rogers.
It's my son. Every day. And that's hard. Because somebody took something from me.
Cases like Jonathan's are far too common in the United States. Stories like his also receive far less media attention on average, making the process of finding sufficient information about him tedious and difficult. It is unfortunate that not only is justice being served slowly, but that Jonathan's story is also steadily being forgotten. This is the story of a 1995 cold case murder of a 14-year-old Atlanta girl, which was solved after more than 25 years thanks to DNA and genealogy technology. She dreamt of being a doctor and was days away from middle school graduation. Nicole Smith was excited to shop for a pretty white dress to wear to the ceremony, but it turned out that she had a dark and sad ending to her fortunes. On June 7, 1995, Nicole Smith was walking to school with her sister, but forgot something and walked through the woods to return home. In the woods, she was confronted by a man who brutally assaulted her twice in the face. Two security guards at a nearby apartment complex heard the shots and ran into the woods, where they found Nicole and her book bag, which contained her identification and address. Smith, Nicole's mother, said that she had heard the gunshots, followed by the sound of a police helicopter. There was a knock on her door, and when she opened it, 2 Atlanta police officers told Smith that Nicole had been killed. Smith identified her daughter at a funeral home. "I saw that she had cried and had tears dried up on her face," Smith said. Immediately after her body was found, a massive investigation was launched. The case was a priority for Atlanta police, but eventually the investigation went cold, as the authorities could not name a suspect for a very long time, and the investigative techniques got exhausted. Despite interviewing hundreds of people and taking blood samples from at least 50 people, the police could not find a solid lead to take the case forward and name a prime suspect. This was therefore closed with no hope of finding the suspect.
The police department pulled out all stops. They interviewed hundreds of people. They brought 2 recruit classes out to canvass the neighborhood, and they ended up taking blood samples from at least.
On Detective Vince Velasquez's sheer motivation, the case was reopened by him in 2002, even after encountering no leads for almost 2 years. In 2004, the case took a turn when another young girl had been assaulted in East Point, Georgia, and managed to survive to report to the investigative authorities. Immediately after, 13-year-old Betty Brown reached out to the authorities. They took no time in collecting DNA samples from her crime scene and sending it to the genealogy department for identification.
Fast forward to 2004. A young girl's walking home from her friend's house on Father's Day. 7 years and 9 days after this other young girl was killed, she's pulled into the bushes by a guy and raped, but not killed. That DNA from her rape kit matches the killer.
As it turned out, the samples from Smith and Brown's crime scenes matched, giving the authorities a sliver of hope that the suspect had not eloped and was still around. After having the information that the suspect of both crimes was the same man, the police left no stone unturned in finding out his description. Brown showed her whole support to the Smith family by agreeing to be part of the investigation and helping the authorities draw the sketch of the suspect. "This case has not died," Velasquez stated in a conference after taking retirement in 2017 and handing over the case to Scott DeMeester, who is a homicide detective on the Coldcase squad with the Atlanta Police Department. However, years passed on and there was no sign or identification of the suspect. Finally, after roughly 3 years, the assailant was brought into the bigger picture as a figure of interest, with the support of outside genealogy and ancestry databases.
Look into the possibility of trying to identify the suspect utilizing genealogy and ancestry databases.
According to DeMeester, investigators were able to put an end to their long-lost hope after they were alerted just before the day of Christmas that the DNA on the 2 crime scenes indeed matched that of a man named Arnold. Shockingly, the detectives found out that Arnold had been dead for a few months due to liver and kidney failure in a hospice facility. "Today, for me, is a bittersweet moment," Nicole's mother, Aquinelia Smith, said on the day of the press conferences. "So many unanswered questions I had for him," she said while breaking down. Brown was also present there and detested how long it took for the investigation to complete.
"Today, for me, is a bittersweet moment. I never imagined this person to be."
What do you guys think? Does the cold cases, which take decades to come to their resolution and the killer has already died of natural causes, actually provide justice to the victim? Can families actually heal after decades of trauma and longing for closure? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you liked the video, hit that like button, share this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the bell icon to never miss an update on whenever we come back with more interesting cold cases.